Feel the steady pulse of a city built on neon dreams and metallic promises. We take you behind the glowing billboards to find the real stories of the people who live within the lights. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the ultimate urban experience. My aunt wired me $80,000 over 4 years. That's what she told me, standing at the head of the table at my own wedding reception, with a champagne glass in her hand and tears in her eyes. She said she was so proud of how far I'd come. She said watching me build my life from nothing made her heart full. I stood there in my wedding dress and I could not speak, not because I was moved, because I had never seen a single dollar of it. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a physical therapist assistant at a clinic in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been working since I was 16. 2 jobs through high school, 3 through college. I graduated with debt that took me 5 years to chip away at, and I did it by packing my own lunches, by skipping vacations, by wearing the same 4 pairs of shoes in rotation until the soles started separating. I did not grow up poor. That's the part that always confused me. My parents owned a nice house in Scottsdale. My father managed a commercial real estate portfolio. My mother had her own interior design business that, from the outside, looked successful. We had a pool. We had 2 cars. My brother had a gaming setup that cost more than my first car. But me? I was always told there was nothing extra. My college applications came back with offers, and I was told to pick the cheapest one. I did. I took out loans while my brother's private university was paid in full without a word. When I asked about it, my mother said his program was more of an investment. I was studying kinesiology. She said that wasn't a career. It was a hobby that paid badly. I filed that away. I kept going. My Aunt Ruth is my father's older sister. She never had children of her own. She spent 30 years as a civil engineer and retired early with more money than she knew what to do with. She always sent birthday cards. She always called on holidays, but we weren't close in the way that cousins in movies are close. My parents weren't close with her either. There was always a distance there that I never fully understood. When I was 20, Aunt Ruth reached out to me directly. She asked how school was going. I told her honestly that it was hard, that I was stretched thin, that I was worried about the debt. She listened. She didn't offer money then. She just said she was proud of me and that she would always be in my corner. Over the next 4 years, she called me every few months. She always asked how I was doing financially. I always told her the same thing, that I was managing, barely, but managing. She always seemed a little puzzled when I said that. She'd pause just a second too long. I thought she was just being thoughtful. I had no idea what that pause meant until my wedding day. I married my husband Daniel last spring. Small ceremony, outdoor venue, 63 guests. We paid for it ourselves, and we were proud of that. My parents offered to contribute, but when we sat down to plan it, the offer evaporated. There was always a reason. My father's portfolio was restructuring. My mother had just taken on a major client. We stopped waiting and figured it out on our own. Aunt Ruth flew in from Denver. I hadn't seen her in person in almost 3 years. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She brought a card and held my hands for a long time before the ceremony and said she was so glad to finally be there for something good. The reception was at the venue's outdoor terrace. String lights, a live acoustic duo, food trucks, the whole thing. It was beautiful, and I don't say that because I planned it. I say it because I was genuinely happy that day in a way I hadn't been in a long time. About an hour in, my father tapped a glass and gave a toast. Standard stuff, proud of his daughter, wished us a long and happy life, thanked the guests. My mother said a few words. Then Aunt Ruth stood up. She was not on the program for toasts. She tapped her champagne glass, and she smiled, and she looked right at me across the terrace. And she said she had to say something because her heart was too full to stay quiet. She said she had been wiring me $3,000 every quarter for 4 years. She said watching me build something real, pay off my debt, save for a wedding all on my own had restored her faith in this generation. She said she hoped that money gave me a little bit of breathing room when I needed it most. She raised her glass. Everyone clapped. Daniel squeezed my hand. And I stood there with a smile I had to hold in place manually, because underneath it, my entire body had gone cold. $3,000 a quarter. 4 years. I did the math automatically, the way you do when a number hits you wrong. That's $48,000. My brain corrected itself. No, she said 80,000. I lost the math in the shock, but the number didn't matter. Not the exact number. What mattered was that I had never, not once, received a wire from my aunt. Not 3,000, not 300, not $3. I kept the smile. I raised my glass. I said thank you. I got through the rest of that reception on autopilot. I hugged guests. I danced with Daniel. I cut the cake and laughed at the right moments, and no one could tell that something had just cracked open inside me. Before Aunt Ruth left that night, I pulled her aside near the parking lot while Daniel was saying goodbye to his family. I told her quietly that her toast meant the world to me. And then I told her, just as quietly, that I wanted to make sure she had the right account information on file, because I had never actually received those transfers. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "What do you mean? Your mother handled all of that." And there it was. My mother handled all of that. I drove home that night, and I didn't say much. Daniel asked me twice if I was okay, and I said yes both times, which was not true either time. I sat in our bathroom after he fell asleep, and I did the math again on my phone. If she had sent $80,000 over 4 years, and the transfers went through my mother, then my mother had redirected $80,000 that was meant for me. $80,000. I thought about the years I spent rationing. I thought about the winter I kept my apartment at 60 degrees because I was afraid of the heating bill. I thought about the semester I picked up a weekend restaurant shift on top of my internship because my financial aid check came in short. I thought about every time I asked my parents if they could help, and my mother said, with a straight face, that money was tight. I did not sleep. In the morning, I called Aunt Ruth. I asked her to tell me everything. Not defensively. I told her I wasn't angry at her. I just needed to understand the whole picture. She told me she had started the transfers when I was a junior in college, after the conversation where I told her I was struggling. She said she had reached out to my mother first, explained what she wanted to do, and my mother said it would be better to route the money through her so it didn't affect my financial aid calculations. That sounded plausible enough that Ruth didn't question it. She set up the quarterly transfers to my mother's account and assumed my mother was passing them through to me. My mother had told her over the course of 4 years that I was doing wonderfully, that the money was helping, that I had paid off my student loans, that I was saving, that I was thriving. Aunt Ruth had been calling me every few months for 4 years, listening to me describe how stretched I was, and the whole time she thought she had given me enough padding to be okay. She thought I was describing the kind of normal person financial anxiety that everyone has. She didn't realize I was describing genuine hardship because she thought I had a cushion. That pause. Every time she paused on the phone, she was confused because what I was saying didn't match what my mother was telling her. She cried when she understood. I cried too, but differently. I told her I needed a few days to figure out what I wanted to do. She told me she would support whatever I decided. She also told me, very calmly, that she had records of every single transfer. She'd been meticulous about documentation for decades. She had routing confirmations, bank statements, dates, and amounts going back to the very first deposit. She said, "Claire, I want you to know something. That money was yours. Legally and morally, it was yours. And there are options." I thanked her and hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Here's the part where I want to say I took time to think. I want to say I considered every angle, gave my parents the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was an explanation. And I did do some of that. For about 48 hours, I ran through every alternative version. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe the transfers went to a wrong account, and my mother was too embarrassed to tell Ruth. Maybe there was some version of this where my parents were just incompetent rather than dishonest. Then I called my mother. I kept it simple. I said I'd spoken with Aunt Ruth, and that I was confused about the transfers she'd been sending, and that I wanted to understand where that money had gone. My mother did not miss a beat. She said that money had gone towards supporting me for years. She said they had put a roof over my head, food on the table, paid for things I didn't even know about. She said family finances don't work like a bank ledger. That support isn't always direct deposit. She said I was being ungrateful. I said, specifically, Mom, where did Aunt Ruth's money go? She said it was complicated and that this wasn't the kind of conversation to have over the phone. I said I agreed and that I'd like to meet in person and I'd like her to bring whatever records she had. She said, and I will never forget this exact phrasing, "Claire, you have always had a problem with gratitude. This family sacrificed more than you will ever know." I said, "I'll see you Sunday." I didn't go alone. I brought Daniel. I also, on the advice of Aunt Ruth, contacted a family law and civil attorney named Margaret, who I found through a referral. I explained the situation in about 15 minutes. She told me I had potential grounds for a civil claim, specifically that this was a straightforward case of conversion, the legal term for when someone takes property that belongs to someone else and treats it as their own. She also used the term constructive fraud. She said she'd seen cases like this before. She said the documentation from the sender, meaning Ruth's bank records, would be central. She told me what questions to ask at the meeting. She told me what to listen for. I went to my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. My brother was there, which I hadn't expected. He was sitting in the living room looking at his phone like he didn't have a stake in any of this. Maybe he didn't. I still don't know how much he knew. My father opened with an offer to explain. He said the money had been managed as part of a family account structure. He said they had used some of it to cover costs associated with my college education that went beyond what I was aware of, administrative fees, supplemental payments, things like that. He spoke in the language of someone who manages commercial real estate for a living. Vague, plausible-sounding terms: portfolio management, allocation, overhead. My mother sat beside him and nodded. I asked for receipts. My father said the records weren't organized in a way he could produce on short notice. I said I could wait. He said I was being adversarial and that this wasn't how family handled things. I said Aunt Ruth had complete records of every transfer, including dates and amounts, all sent to my mother's account, and that I had spoken with an attorney who had reviewed the situation. The room went quiet in a specific way, not uncomfortable quiet. Calculating quiet. Both of my parents looked at each other for just a second, and in that second, I understood something clearly. They were not surprised that this conversation had happened. They had known it was possible. They had been prepared for some version of it. What they hadn't prepared for was the documentation. My father said carefully that he thought we should all take a breath and handle this without outside parties involved. I said the outside parties were already involved. My mother said Aunt Ruth had always tried to create division in this family, and that this was just another example of her interference. I said Aunt Ruth sent money specifically for me, specifically labeled as support for me, and that it never reached me. My father said there were two sides to every situation. I said I'd like to hear his side, and that if he had documentation showing how the money was spent on my behalf, I was ready to look at it. He did not produce documentation. My brother, still on the couch, said quietly, "Dad, just that. Just his name." My father looked at him, and something passed between them that I still think about. My brother put his phone down and looked at the ceiling. I left that house without a resolution, but with something more useful. I had watched both of my parents, under mild and calm pressure, fail to produce a single piece of documentation and fall back on manipulation language instead of facts. I recorded the conversation. I had checked the recording laws in Arizona before I went. Single-party consent. Everything was legal. I sent the recording to Margaret that evening, along with a written summary of what had been said. She called me the next morning and said, "You handled that exactly right." What followed was 3 months of legal process that I am not going to walk through in complete detail, partly because it was exhausting, and partly because some of it is still technically ongoing. But here is what happened in summary. Aunt Ruth filed a civil claim with Margaret's help. The claim was against my parents for conversion and civil fraud. Ruth's documentation was, as she had said, meticulous. 32 transfers over 4 years. Every confirmation number. Every date. Every amount. Every single one sent to my mother's account with a note indicating it was for my benefit. My parents hired their own attorney. He sent a letter arguing that the money had been used for shared family expenses, including costs they had incurred supporting me. They produced some receipts. They were for things like one grocery run from when I was home for Thanksgiving in 2021 and a portion of a cell phone bill from years earlier. Margaret described their documentation as, in her professional opinion, not remotely adequate. During the discovery process, Aunt Ruth's bank records showed the transfers. My parents' bank records, which were subpoenaed, showed where that money went. Some of it paid down my father's business line of credit. Some of it paid for my mother's car. A significant portion appeared in what looked like cash withdrawals. None of it went to me. My parents' attorney countered that family financial arrangements are informal and that there was no written agreement specifying that the funds had to be passed directly to me. This is actually a legitimate legal argument in some contexts. It's why Margaret had been careful about the specific claims she filed. But the combination of Ruth's clear documentation, the recorded conversation in which neither parent could point to a single expenditure on my behalf, and the paper trail of how the money was actually used, made the defense difficult to sustain. We settled out of court. I am not allowed to disclose the exact terms, but I will say this. I no longer have the student debt I spent 5 years paying off. I have a savings account that, for the first time in my adult life, does not make me anxious when I look at it. And I own, outright, the second car that Daniel and I had been sharing because we couldn't afford a second one. My parents have not reached out to me since the settlement was finalized. My brother sent me a single text that said I didn't know. I believed him. I still do. I replied and told him that, and that I wasn't holding it against him. He hasn't responded since, but I think that's about his own processing and not about me. Aunt Ruth and I talk every 2 weeks now. She drove down to Phoenix in February, and we went to a botanical garden and ate sandwiches on a bench and talked for 4 hours about things that had nothing to do with any of this. She apologized again for not catching it sooner. I told her to stop apologizing. She had done everything right. She had the records. She had shown up at my wedding and accidentally handed me a key that unlocked 4 years of confusion. I don't know how to wrap this up neatly because it isn't neat. It's strange to grieve a version of your parents you wanted to believe in longer than you should have. It's strange to feel relief and loss at the same time, to feel like you've finally got solid ground under your feet, just as the people who were supposed to be your foundation step out of the picture. What I know is this: I am not the person my mother described to Aunt Ruth. I was not thriving. I was not coasting on a cushion. I was working 3 jobs and skipping heating in January and feeling ashamed that I couldn't keep up. And somewhere in a house in Scottsdale, my parents were depositing my aunt's money and telling each other, and her, that it was going to good use. It was. It just took 4 years and a wedding toast to get to me. If there is something I want you to take from this, it's not about them. It's about that pause I mentioned at the beginning, the one I noticed every time Aunt Ruth called and went quiet for just a moment after I said I was barely getting by. Pay attention to the pauses. Pay attention to the moments when the story someone has been told about you doesn't match the life you're actually living. Pay attention to the people who show up consistently, even from a distance, who keep checking in even when they think things are fine. Sometimes that person is the one holding the key. You just don't know it yet.